All right, so you should at least understand what a procedural texture is and the benefits of using it compared to an image-based texture. Now in this video, I'm going to do my best to give you an overview of every single procedural texture in KeyShot. Now this isn't a deep dive. I'm not going to make photorealistic versions of every one of these textures, but the point is, if there's any tips and tricks I know about using these textures, I will give those to you during this video. So let's go ahead and start off with the brushed 2D procedural texture. And I'll go ahead and close this panel on the left just so we have some more room. When we hit C to preview, we get our brushed pattern or texture. I'm gonna set the size to something like 5. And now we have a very fine brush pattern. I wanna rotate this. So I'm gonna hit move texture. And this time we see the rotate and we have this little box that represents the scale. So as I scale it up, that box gets bigger and smaller. And we see the ability to rotate this. And this is indeed using box mapping because this is not a 3D procedural texture. So if I rotate this box here, we can try to see about potentially lining up some of this grain from both the top and the sides. Like I said, we have the ability to change the mapping type to planar, box, cylinder, sphere, UV, camera, and node because this is a 2D procedural texture. So it is still customizable and still has a unlimited resolution and all that good stuff, but it doesn't have the 3-dimensionality, which means we have to map it properly. This is the type of thing where you would use, say, UV mapping if you want this to perfectly follow the band or the edge of this desk. To make this work, you're just gonna basically plug this, here, let's get out of our preview. You can plug this into the diffuse or whatever channel you want, plug it in a bump or something, maybe even roughness to get a cool effect. But with this brush 2D node, you've got your size and scaling, your mapping. You've got the color option. You can change basically how black and white this is. Sure, you could add color to it, but most often you're gonna be using this in the grayscale, and you'll normally be using this to control specularity, whether you're working with a metal material or an anisotropic material, which is typically used for stainless steel. You have control over those grooves, which is going to control things like length. I think this looks fairly artificial until you add quite a bit more length. I actually like to use mine close to 10. I really like very fine brush patterns. And then I take the size and tend to scale this way down to something like 1. And to me, that looks a little bit more realistic, but it depends on the scale of the object you're working with. I'll bring this back up to 10 and bring this down to 1. And if we look here, we have contrast, which is of course going to be the contrast between the black and white. So how strong does this appear? We have levels, and as we increase the levels, we'll get more detail and finer, smaller versions of this pattern. Again, go light-handed with it, I think. Levels fall off is going to basically create, this is going to be a little bit hard to see, I think. It's going to kind of soften and blend together those various levels. And it means the levels that you add, the higher this number gets, will be more faded, I guess, less strong. We also have grain. So if I take my grain up to 100, you'll see a lot of grain. Okay, that's maybe a bit much. Let's do 10. There we go. So grain is going to be just as it sounds, and then you have a grain size. So 1 is pretty big. We can take it down to say like 0.5 or 0.2. And this graininess is something that happens with steel. It looks pretty good. You just have to work on getting the scale appropriate. And then finally, you've got your distortion, which will affect the overall kind of uniformity or lack thereof of your brushed pattern. Okay, moving on. Let's grab a mesh. Mesh is really awesome. I love this. It's very useful. Most people don't realize you can make almost any kind of pattern that you need to. So you've got your normal mapping and clipping settings. Clipping, if you turn those on, allows you to, let's bring our clipping width in. It allows you to limit where this goes. So if you need a custom like grid of mesh, you can do that using the clipping height and width. You can adjust those independently if you need to. I'll turn those off. We have colors, background color, foreground color. We can use this for opacity. A lot of people create kind of like mesh grills with this type of thing. There's more advanced techniques to make it look more realistic, but that's the gist. You got alpha modes, which gets into more advanced stuff we don't want to talk about yet. Shape and pattern, this will scale the overall mesh up uniformly. We can change the shape of the actual hole, which is impressive. Say we want hexagons. And let's say we actually want to take our mesh pattern to hexagonal, or hexagonal, I guess. We can play with the spacing, and all of a sudden we can get a totally unique looking mesh pattern. And that's cool because that'll give you a totally different appearance than what we had before. So mesh can be really well customized. You can add this thing called fall off, which will give you like a kind of a fade toward the center. And then if you plug this into something like bump, you would get this, let's get out a preview. You would get this cool kind of hexagonal ground sort of tactile pattern. Scale this thing down. You can space them out if you just use the pattern spacing on their own. So there's tons of control you have over this. You can even add jitter and distortion, which will give you, here you can see, this will give you various amounts of distortion on this pattern. So you can really do a lot with this. Okay, so mesh is great for repeating patterns. It's also a 2D procedural, so you have to make sure that you follow the laws of our normal mapping types. But moving on, we have next a weave. If you ever need to do textiles, this is gonna be the way to do it, unless you wanna use real cloth, which is a bit more of a newer advanced material. Now a weave is very simple. It's just gonna be an over-under weave pattern. And you can play with things like the fibers. We can add a bunch of fibers. Let's see. So if I increase the fibers, we can see the lines that start to appear. We can increase grain, so we can have some little kind of dots introduced there as well. Weave distortion is going to give us some random left to right. We've got width variation, which is going to, again, give you more randomness here. Color variation. These are all pretty self-explanatory. Warp width and weft, I can't say that. Warp width and weft width. This is going to give you less spacing, these little black areas, if we increase these. If we make them wider, we tighten up the weave. If we reduce them, then you're gonna have more space between them. Like a looser weave. And lastly, if you turn on thread shadows, they get the shading on the edges, which makes them look a little bit more rounded and a little more realistic. But my big issue is you don't get thread shadows underneath the overlapping pieces. So that's a little bit, I don't know, kind of fake looking. And then of course, under color, you can change the color of the warp, the weft, and the background color. But yeah, I mean, it works okay, especially if you just need like a faux kind of a, you know, bumpy texture or something. I think this has been used for carbon fiber in the past, but there are some better ways to do it now. But generally, this is the weave. It does, again, it's a 2D procedural, so you have to follow your normal projection or mapping type conventions. Moving on from there, we have our 3D procedurals. We've got a brushed radial, which is a great thing to have on hand if you need to do any sort of knobs or tactile finishes, anything spun metal. So you just basically scale this down, and you would use this the same way you would use the brushed procedural, the brushed 2D, which is this one. Normally this texture is going to control something like the specular or the the specular value of anisotropic material type or the metal material type. You scale this down quite a bit, at least I like to. And then looking further down, we have bump height control. We have color 1 and 2. We've got some radius control. I'm not even quite sure how to access these. I've never used them, never needed to. You got variation, angular noise, and you also have distortion. And down below, radial axial blend. So radial axial blend will be, if you take it all the way away, you should just have complete concentric circles. But as we increase these, they should start to kind of overlap a little bit. Same with your distortion noise, it's just going to give you more imperfections in the pattern. All right, we also have, moving on down, camouflage, one of my favorites. Not because I'm that much into camo, but because it's really flexible. We did see this earlier in the demo. I'm not going to go too far into it, but you can go ahead and increase spray, which will kind of blur this all together. You can play with scale. You can play with distortion, which is going to give you more or less detail in this. And you can mix the colors, which will give you tertiary colors. And I've seen this used for everything from metal flake all the way to mud on tires or leaves or galvanized steel. There's a lot of fun things you can use camo for in KeyShot. All right, the next one down we have is called cellular. This one's pretty cool. This one is usually used for making bump textures. It's very basic. So you just have a scale, you've got colors. You do have the ability to change its shape a little bit from circular cells to square cells or to diamond shaped cells, which is kind of cool. But I've almost only seen the circular cells used because they're just more organic looking. Now, this makes the most sense if we plug this into bump. It's going to look most familiar. And then if we scale this guy way down for its bump height, we should see just kind of the simple effect that it can take. And you can play with things like shape number 1 and 2 to kind of get different sort of effects with it. You can increase the levels, which will give you much more fine detail. And this will give you much more of a rough sort of organic looking effect. And of course we have noise to introduce more kind of waviness. But yeah, this is a nice tactile texture. You can play with it. You can push it pretty far. It's got quite a bit of variability in here. Moving on, we also have the color gradient, and this is great for two main things, really. I use this a lot for making masks, so fading something in or out, or turning off blend, and actually, let's see if we can do this. If I move this, you should see a black hard line. If this was used to control something like opacity, it would literally hide the second half of this. Anything black would disappear. So I use this for masking out, not parts, but typically other labels, if I want to make them a different material or something like that. Again, you can turn on the blend and it will fade between these two colors, and that'll give you a much more subtle effect. For example, if I plug that into opacity, you would see it kind of fade out gently. But again, this is often used mostly not for opacity, but it's often used for setting actual colors. So if we want this to be some sort of cool red color and we want it to fade into a warm orange color, just, I don't know, because, we can do that. And now we have this part that's got just this cool faded color. So this is great because, again, you're not relying on an image-based texture, which you're gonna see some weird stepping, and it's gonna be hard to produce a smooth gradient using an image-based texture. But KeyShot works in 32-bit space and linear color space, and that's going to help produce a nice smooth gradient using this color gradient. You can also change its gradient type to be a different shape. So, for example, spherical. If I center it on the part, let's go ahead and move this on over. You should, let's see, if we scale it down to a smaller scale, we should see it fade from one color to the next in a radial pattern, which is really cool. And it's spherical, so what that means is imagine a sphere in the middle that we're kind of pushing through this object. What else can we do with it? We've got a cylindrical mapping type, we've got a diamond mapping type, we've got angular view direction is really cool. This is quite useful where when a surface is perpendicular to the camera, then it's going to be one color, and then as the surface rolls away from the camera, it fades to the other color. This can be quite useful as well. Man, there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can add other color stops. So if you want to introduce a third color, you can do all that. Set it to planar back again. So yeah, there's really a lot we can do with our color gradient. I end up using them quite a bit. Okay, moving on, we also have a contour. And contour is new for KeyShot 10. If I plug this into the diffuse, you get basically, it's kind of like a tune material, but it's actually a texture. So we don't need to go into tune material. We can use this to add an outline to an existing material if we want. So when you double click on it, you've got your width and pixels, which I actually don't like. I like to turn off contour width and pixels. Can we even do that? Yes, okay, there we go. So set that to like 1 or 0.5 or whatever, maybe 1. And then we can play with that multiplier. and that's going to give a thicker line on the very exterior of the object. And then we have an angle. So we're not getting a line in here because the angle between these faces are all about 45 degrees or less. This is set to 60. So if we bring this below that threshold, now we get lines on the inside. We can do a part width, part contour multiplier, contour quality. There's a lot that we can do with this to kind of make it, give it that outline look that we might want. And if you're familiar with the Toon material from previous versions of KeyShot, this is not very different than that. The next one we have up is our curvature, which is really awesome. People love this one. I do too. Curvature looks like Toon or a contour when you start using it, but it is in fact quite different. So positive curvature, if we set to blue, and then we have zero curvature set to white, and negative curvature set to red. Now you're not going to see any red on here because there is no negative curvature on this part. There's only positive curvature, which gets blue colored. If we reduce the cutoff, you're going to start to see the blue get a little bit more intense. And the radius will spread that blue out, so it's going to make a bigger contour. Now, what are we doing with this? Well, this curvature is great to wear away materials that you layer up. So if you use, say you want to put a layer of metal on plastic, or plastic on top of metal, I guess, and then wear it away selectively, areas of positive curvature are going to get worn away first, and therefore you would use this, say, as black, and black, if you plug it into the opacity, would make the material underneath it disappear. So, you know, something like this where you have negative curvature set to white, zero set to white, and positive to black, this would make the edge worn away, and you could plug that into the opacity of a label to reveal the material underneath it. So that's pretty much how you use the curvature node. We also have a granite node. If we preview this guy, this is much more organic. This is probably the most organic looking procedural texture. And oftentimes I use it for roughness. So if I set this to white and black, we now have a white and black map, and it looks very, again, random and organic, which means it's a great texture to use for any type of wear or variation. So if you were to plug this into the, say, roughness of this material, you would get areas that are more rough than others. And if we went into the properties of the granite, we would need to make some adjustments so it's not quite so bright, and this would give it more of a uniform, rough finish. And now we have areas that are a little more glossy and a little more rough, and this is still pretty heavy-handed, but this is the type of thing that I like to do to add in a little variation for my materials. So that's granite. Below that we have a leather. This is also, let's see, plug it into, actually let's just preview it. It's very small. Let's go ahead and scale this guy up, do 1200. So this one ends up looking kind of like a procedural cellular sort of thing again. I think it's kind of built off the same model. You can see some repeating. I'm not a big fan of this. In fact, I don't think I've ever used it and been happy with the results, but it's there if you want it. That's about all I have to say about the leather. Next up, we have a marble. And of course we can use it for marble, but if we set it to kind of a black and white, which I typically like to do with my procedural textures, we can use it for something else like bump. We could also take away the noise. And let's say we rotate this. There we have these kind of parallel lines. Maybe we scale it down a bit and increase the thickness. So something like this should be able to be plugged into the bump channel and get some sort of effects. I don't know if it's working up here for some reason. But yeah, typically you can use this to get some pretty interesting effects as well, because it's just parallel lines. You can, anything that needs some sort of lines in it, you can use it for that. There's noise fractal. This one's super popular for bump pretty much. That's pretty much all we use it for. So, you know, you could plug it into the bump channel, and you get this kind of nice tactile, to me it's like 80s or 70s countertop texture, if you will. But you've got just the two colors. You've got your fall off, which changes kind of the overall softness and shape. So it's really soft and plump here, but if you go higher, it's kind of sharp and much more pronounced. You got a bump height you can play with, as well as levels, which will either make it simpler or more kind of busy or detailed. Similar to that one, we have our noise texture, which we looked at earlier. It's used just like noise fractal, but it's a simpler shape and pattern. So if all you need is a little bit of waviness, whether you scale it up really large, just to add a little bit of randomness, let's try something like 50. So you could use it just to add a very subtle sort of waviness in a surface, or you could use it very small to create that high frequency pattern, up to you. What else do we have here? We've got our occlusion. Occlusion's a little bit interesting. Not very many people quite get this one. So on this, you're not going to see anything unless I bring back some other pieces of geometry. Occlusion is going to shade areas darker wherever there's a nearby surface. Now, if we click inside, it will invert it, basically. So all of these surfaces are occluding one another. Now, if we reduce the radius, we actually can make sure that surfaces, so let's bring this down to something like 3. What this does is it says all surfaces that are at least 3 millimeters away from another surface, they're unoccluded, so they get a white color. If they are within 3 millimeters from another surface, they get shaded black because they're occluded by one another. So this chamfered 45-degree angle surface is within 3 millimeters of the other surfaces around it, so it gets shaded black. So this is kind of like curvature, but you can use this in a bit of a different way. It's like the lazier, faster curvature, and it is different, but you use it to kind of build up wear or dust and grime in certain areas in a similar fashion. Next up, we have our scratches, good old scratches. These look very fake when you start out, but the good news is they can be made to look fairly realistic, but it takes quite a bit of finesse. In my opinion, to get these to look right, you really need to make them small and skinny. The way you do that is go to size and increase the thinness to something ridiculous like 10. They become really, really small. And then you can start playing with things like density or maybe levels, add a couple levels, which will add smaller, finer scratches as well. And then you can play with fall off to soften them, or you can play with the directional noise, try something like cylindrical or spherical noise, see if you like one better than the other. There's no right or wrong, but again, being that these are black and white, the way they're typically used is you can either put them in for the bump, just reduce the bump height down to something very small, 0.1 or something, negative 0.01, I don't know, something like that. So when you just catch it in the right angle, you see some scratches. And then you can also use them as opacity, like I talked about before, to wear away a layered material. So for example, if we had, let's just go ahead and do this. If we had a material like a plastic, and this one was a metal, and we put the plastic on top of the metal as a label, and then if you took the scratches and plugged them into the opacity of the plastic, let's make that plastic orange or something, where those scratches are, we can see the metal underneath it. And then we could plug this into the bump of the metal, and you would get this kind of a groove with a little highlight on the edge, and it would look more realistic. All right, what other textures do we have? We also have spots. Almost the same thing here, although these ones are just little dots. So you can play with the density, the scale. You can even go square or diamond shape, which is good if you want, like, say, glittery sort of stuff. But for circular, they're going to be the most likely to look kind of paint-like. You could kind of do paint splatters by having some distortion, some levels, increase the fall off a little bit, density. This thing could be plugged into, in the same way, our layered plastic, so opacity, and now we see the metal underneath it. But that looks kind of like the opposite of what we want. So if we want orange paint splatter on top of metal, we have to take the black and white and invert those. And then we could get the kind of effect that we were looking for, as long as we also use the spots in the bump channel. And now we have some kind of thickness with this little highlight as well. So that's one way you could use the spots. What else do we have in here? We've got, we're going to skip over vertex color and volume map because those are very specific. Wood is pretty simple too. Wood is good for concentric circles. It's a little hard to see. Let's make it black and white like we typically do. And here we can see the circles and it looks like a wood pattern. And as you play with these sliders, you'll find ways to add some customization. So you can make it a little bit thicker. You can play with the variation. So do you want it to be noisier, which is more random, or do you want it to be more just like straight up circles? Take away the axial noise and the color noise, and now you just have perfect circles. From here, you could plug this into, say, a metal in the bump category, and now you have this cool machine surface. So this is a reminder that the wood shouldn't just be taken, its name shouldn't be taken at face value. Wood isn't just always wood. It's just a pattern of concentric circles that can be used however you like. A lot of that holds true for like camo doesn't need to be used as camo, and marble doesn't need to be used as marble. So just get clever with these and you'll be able to get the most out of them. Finally, we have a wood advanced, which I don't need to go too far into. There's a lot here. I have a tutorial on creating realistic procedural wood on my YouTube channel, and we spend almost an hour, I think, maybe 30 minutes in that tutorial going through all of these settings in detail. But this is just a more customizable wood, and it builds on the same concentric circle idea that the previous texture did. So with that, there's a rundown of all the procedural textures. Again, it would take literally, I don't know, forever, hours if I really showed you how to use every single one. But now you know what they are, what options you have, and somewhat how to use them. Hopefully that was helpful. In the next video, we are going to get into utility nodes.